It is my pleasure to be here today, and I would like to give out some thanks to people who made this possible uh, in the office that actually negotiates and helps the cohorts of MLK scholars is Megan and Sharice. Please give them a round of applause. They keep us straight, they keep us going, and we're very grateful for them. Thank you so much for your arduous work that you do in keeping us organized. I'd also like to thank the Department of Urban Studies and Planning, um, the director, Chris Zingras, and my host, Dr. Carolyn Crockett. Her brilliance has led a course that I have been asked to co-teach. Even more importantly, as an activist in the community, from 2019, I have been involved in this course, this activity. It's more than a course. It's a community movement, as I see it, called Hacking the Archives. And the founder is Dr. Carolyn Crockett. And so having the opportunity to have audience with community leaders, with graduate students, with community-based organizations, and ask questions that would then involve urban planning and the thinking of students at MIT who would be the future planners of this city was an absolute honor to see that thinking go forward. So having been a part of that, I think that from that course, I have gleaned a way to think about things, a way to have my own creative manifesto of I remember, I reclaim, I restore, and I reimagine as a way to navigate my own art practice in that envelope of community activism and the projects that we reviewed and undertook. So the expansion of what I have experienced here has to do with creating a visual language that becomes a part of my one life work, my artistic practice, that is one voice, one directed activity toward understanding the occupation of space that began with the acknowledgement of 500 years of Black and Indigenous history that may not have appeared in the narrative that we are familiar with, but needed to be, and actually supporting and participating in the expansion of that narrative. And so today, I want to show you some of what I have encountered along the way here at MIT that gave me the opportunity to expand my lens for this practice even further. And I'd like to share those moments with you as we go forward. The Hack in the Archives course was actually named as a visual guide to alternative urban spaces, to alternative urban planning. That kind of lens was actually what we were involved in, and I had the opportunity to participate in that course as a co-instructor from 2024, and then again in the fall in 2025. So seeing that as a manifestation on this campus and the thinking that evolved from that course gave me a real impetus, gave me real inspiration to keep the work that I'm doing going forward. And it had to do with the creation, as I saw year after year of this Hack in the Archives symposium happen, this envelope of community trust. It was there, it was apparent, there were people who were working together from a grassroots level to experts in policy making. It was phenomenal. And so I just want to shout out to that course and Dr. Carolyn Crockett for the idea of working with teams of people that may not have had access to that kind of landscape before, to be heard, to have a voice, and to be seen. So that was a part of what really thrust my interest in looking at the projects that I am going to share with you. And last but not least, I will be revealing my augmented reality project in artificial intelligence to claim a spatial memorial. And then we will have a Q&A.
To reduce their number to 300, a measure designed for their safety.
Otherwise, the demonstration is peaceful. The first day, the marchers tramp a little over 7 miles.
We wouldn't get here. There were those who said that we would get here only over their dead body. All the world today knows that we are here and we are standing before the forces of power in the state of Alabama saying we ain't gonna let nobody turn us around.
So, dedicated to the work of humanity and civil rights was the phenomenal Dr. Martin Luther King, who the fellowship that we have is named after. And those words, we're gonna let nobody turn us around, really apply to today, really apply to where we are in the landscape of building a better world, if you will, and the challenges that we have. And so with that, I wanted to say that that was a part also of my inspiration to be more robust in my practice, if you will, to look at the ideas that Carolyn introduced to me, textile as text. So as we think about the opportunity to embed in the cloth idea, the ideas of being able to expand what the cloth imbues in memory, what it takes on in claiming space, and then as you use it as a design element, what it has and holds as familiar. Cloth is familiar. It's that place where we all know from birth to death that we can rest in. And so in my practice, as I began probably about 25 years ago, looking at textiles as a major primary source of art making, I began to think about the opportunity to go from an archive that I've been presented with, some of the archives I was exposed to in museum collections like the Museum of African American History, where the document is written. How could I take that document that's written and share it in a piece of cloth? There was a process, a medium called transfer. There were also photographs that I used to use on silk that were of my own choice to share history, where cloth as a familiar element may not be so threatening as a page in black and white. And so that I began to delve into more and more of what history could be brought in these cloths and what could be shared in them. I began to think of art as document. So from that opaque silk, I then moved into the study of holograms, of holography at Mass Art and here at MIT. And as I began to understand more about light, and I've understood that there is a department of light here in MIT. I didn't think of light as being an entity unto itself as a study. Exposed to that though, it gave me a way to think about layers of the prism and layers of light that could enter into my work. And so as I went from the opaque cloth to more transparencies and layering of image, my work began to take on a different effect and a different impact. It almost became not 3D, but almost 4D in the layers. And it was also a metaphor of the kind of history I was studying, the history that is completely layered as we go forward with time. So from that opacity to transparency is where you see the holograms that are depicted here in the center of the slide are of children that a hologram project that we did to the New England Foundation for the Arts examined children of the 21st century depicted in holograms, juxtaposed to photographs of children in the 19th century during slavery and the conversation that would be had between them. So this was an innovative way of bringing a consideration of children that are hardly ever talked about in the historical narrative. And the project was actually witnessed by about 17,000 visitors in the State House and then at the Museum of African American History, where we had symposiums on children's health. So what I'm saying here is that the cloth and its entry helped to compel a conversation, helped to share a conversation, and then the holograms led me to understand how much more light can I bring here. So that was a sojourn of mine. My cloth creations are called Quilted Chronicles because they journalize, they create documents, they create over a timeline, people who have been hidden in the recesses of narrative, people whose stories necessarily have not been told, people whose stories can be reimagined. And so what you see here is a collection of the work that I do and share across centuries. And making selections about that has been a very important part of my work. I see, as you see in the bulleted points, light as color, textiles as text, hidden people, living archives as we experience them, as you bring your information to view them that you already have with you, a priori knowledge, and the mapping that we can do through these textiles. So the young man featured in a 2020 production that I did has to do with what we were experiencing in some of the Black Lives Matter protests, and the media that was covering the protests showed us the caution tape that made particular spaces barricaded. And so it was my idea to then, how about the people wearing this as a way of their own negotiation of space and warning. So those are the kind of places I've been able to go with the consideration of these stories that we can tell through the textiles. In public space, I'd like to share here that operating as a fiber artist can sometimes be challenging to think of your work and how it can be so large. And so the challenge for me was to think about fiber art as design, as presentation. And I was approached by a billboard company to create the billboard you see here. That's a Fenway, outside of Fenway Park. I had never imagined that that would be the case. So the alternative uses of fiber work that is not just quilted and stitched and binded threads, if you will, comes out into the public as information here. And this is another rendition of it was this very short video that moves across the layered spaces of concentric circles. So those concentric circles are found in my work as an iconic presence and work to identify populations that are targeted. They also have, on a metaphysical level, the drop of water that then ripples out into in spaces concentrically, as we know what that pebble dropped into water would produce. The idea here is that as you see the people who are moving across, we just keep on coming is the name of the quilt that comes from. And it is about movement that is continuous, that has spanned over time to identify protest movements, particularly from the photographs that I witnessed from Selma to Montgomery in the march that was a part of the civil rights movement. It also embodies the movement of human beings in many spaces, spaces where people who have been refugees have to move. They move as a body, they move as community. So it was my pleasure to be able to bring that as an idea for us to consider as we move for demanding human and civil rights. Okay, so as we have experienced my work in 2 seasons of the fall, in 2024 and 2025, you see the images that were actually embedded in the syllabus to consider as a space of urban placement. In the one on your right it's called Who's in My Neighborhood, and I made that one with the advent of a scene and an event with Michael Brown, who was murdered by the police. And in that particular space that you see as a theater box with the pleats, you will see the dual action that happens in that neighborhood with girls who are jumping double Dutch while they are also the Ferguson police coming through. So in one direction, you would see the girls jumping double Dutch, and in the other direction across that space, you would be able to see the Ferguson police. So this young man has assumed the position of watchguard in his community. Also in this piece are cartographic maps that map a community. The one in the center of the target there is actually Dorchester. So when I create reference, it's to share across a universal understanding of mapping, of redlining, what that has done to our communities, and to make those considerations. On the image that you see to your left, this is having to do with climate crisis, and was actually an androgynous figure with the city in his head, the city in his or her head here, depicting the fire that we are seeing, some of what we have, unfortunately, today to witness. But what were they thinking? And my question is, what will they offer us to the future? So, and the actual photograph at the bottom is a Hacking the Archives class, the students who are right here at MIT, along with some community activists and directors of community-based organizations, the archivists who are working with us. So it was my pleasure to be in that body, be surrounded by people who have ideas that are thrusting forward to use archival memory in a space to make things better. I'm now coming to what I would like to highlight as my own seeing slow space of a commissioned work that is a public artwork for the city of Boston. The invitation to actually create a mural on the first fire station built in Boston in 30 years was a real challenge for me to think of my practice in that space of public art. But what materials would be chosen, because fiber would not stand up in that stress. And I didn't want to use paint because there are problems with maintenance of that. So my proposal was to look at the community and examine what the community was about through archival records, through the Leventhal Map Center at the Boston Public Library of that community. It was in Elgilson Square. And the fire station was Fire Station 42. What occurred to me as I was considering this was that working with a master artist, Ralph Helmick, who is internationally known for his sculptures, as my mentor, we were examining materials to be able to produce this sculpture. My work as fiber was a part of the voice that I wanted to have in this work. So one practice, one life, one voice was here present for me to consider in community and how that would live in this sculpture. So our investigation had us to think about the materials that would give a fiber effect. Before that happened, however, looking at a photograph in the archives of a little boy who was maybe about 5 years old, he's approaching a fire alarm, the little red boxes where you pull the lever when there's something that happens. And what occurred to me is that as he was pulling that lever, as a call out, he was trusting that somebody was going to respond, that the fire people who he knew might come to that clarion call would be there. So the potential of that alarm and the potential of this sculpture, I wanted to have a conversation with that. So the idea of looking at this public art commission as call and response was taken from an African tradition of call and response. Drummers call, there's dance. Singers, a lead singer sing, there's a choir that responds. So in this instance, the fire department is being called on to respond. And as we began to think about the evidence of this community as a very strong community, a very differentiated community in terms of the properties that were there, the residents, a very diverse ethnic and cultural background that was represented, I wanted that to be reflected in the sculpture also. And I certainly did not want the fire people who would come to that building every day to not like it. So we set about looking at what were the images that were most compelling and what was analogous to my work. So call and response radiating safety was the choice. The concept was to look at the concentric rings of community that went from, as you can see here, the historic neighborhood, the community, people who walk past this sculpture, this fire station every day, and the firefighters. So as a result of that, we came to this design that reflected those three layers in perforated steel. And the steel had this, as the layers mounted one against the other, you could see this fiber effect, this moire type design come through. A part of the community engagement was an event that we had in that area, in that neighborhood, at the Possible Zone, that included the components of what the sculpture would be representative of. There were firefighters who spoke about safety, who were warning about different aspects of keeping your home safe. There were public officials at the event. There was a kids' corner. There was a presentation of the idea because we didn't want it to be something that the community didn't want. So the approval and the buy-in of the community was a part of developing this trust that we were going to honor the space where they live. And there was a booth, a photo booth that we designed where you see the young man in the middle here, where we could actually take a photograph and use that photograph as a part of the silhouetting from the real, authentic community members in the sculpture. So that was a part of the design also. And here you see the final design, the testing of the material, the perforated steel, the laser cut and assembly, and the actual fabrication that is on an industrial floor where it's laid out layer by layer. And the adventurous engineer who is standing inside the sculpture to test the weight of it so that it doesn't fall down. It's 14 feet in the air from the ground, and he's here, as you can see, a very adventurous man who helped to install the piece. The design of this sculpture was to actually present a day view with daylight, a night view lit with LED lights and rings around it, and an opportunity to change the light to celebrate or remember a fallen firefighter, breast cancer as an aid. The trackable lights in different colors were to be presented to allow for commemoration and remembrance in the community. So we just had another meeting for gathering the information from the firefighters and others of what they would like to have the selection of lights possibly be. And there was quite a spectrum that even had to do with the military in green. The light would be reflected for the firefighters, absolutely red. The fall or the demise of a political appointee or elected official in white. So there were a number of presets for this sculpture to have that are possible. They have not been completed yet, but they will be. And this is a part of the team that is a collaboration of the City of Boston, the Mayor's Office of Art and Culture, the Fire Department, and our collaborating artist team. There is a map inside of the fire station that claims District 9 as their territory to serve, and it's in Eggleston Square on Columbus Avenue. So that is the actual installed sculpture that you see. So it has gone from drawn design to now be a real thing, if you will. I am concerned with space, and I'm concerned with memorial. And so in another project of making the invisible visible, and positing what may be community memory, I've taken on the challenge with a photographer, artist colleague of mine, Hakeem Rakib, to apply for a City of Boston commission in the unmonument envelope of looking at spaces that loom large in the city, that hold memory, that reclaim space. And in this moment, as I was on a panel here at MIT for Black History Month, we pondered a quote. And my colleague Patrick here was on that panel, and Jamila Ribeiro. The question or the quote that was given was from Martin Luther King. And in that quote, he says, We must accept finite defeat, but not lose our infinite hope. And so as I looked at the history and the footprint of Malcolm X in Boston, the sites that he was in here, his Roxbury rooting as he was a teenager in 1941. He comes here to live with his sister at a home at 72 Dale Street in Roxbury. His footprint in about 6 different spaces gave us an opportunity to sing that history that most people don't know. The trajectory that he had from that Boston footprint into a global humanitarian role as an orator made me think about how I could position what I thought about with Hakeem in using augmented reality to make those places of disappointment here in Boston for him as he was incarcerated in the Charles Street Jail, the Charlestown Jail, and a Norfolk prison, to give the users of this AR space a different understanding or a more deep understanding of who Malcolm really was. And so we're using archival photographs, we're using archival documents and articles that reveal at least six to 8 sites, actually, his history as an icon. And what the impact, the question that that project asks is, what was the impact of Malcolm X on your life? And if you had to have a conversation, or you were having the opportunity to have a conversation with him, what would it be? What would be your questions? And so through this AR innovative technology, we're able to pose this to community. We want to build this as a space to share photographs of his life, to share events of even the parallel lines with Martin Luther King. Most of us don't think of him in the same way, as he was a pronounced radical in civil and human rights. But his approach to Coretta Scott King is revealed in this project, and will be revealed in this project in one of those sites, to speak about their conversation of him posing a radical, his leadership as a radical component of the civil rights movement here in this country. There was a scholar here at MIT, Jonathan Een, who wrote the book, The King, who I got that information from as giving credit to him for investigating that. Because there are a lot of myths and a constant mythology that we see about Malcolm that may not be true. So we're out to share this history in its authenticity, and that you be the deciders about what is the full stance here. So as I think about this flipping image allowed through the AR portal, we're able to look at him going from when he was called Detroit Red and a teenager to the Muslim minister. That's one segment of his life here that we see. And that flipped image gives us some indication of some of the experience that we will have there. We are also involving the public in a crowdsourced letter writing experience, and would like to share this on the MIT campus to enlarge the project, to make more people aware of it, and hopefully to have museum space on MIT campus with the project. So I just want to thank you all for your listening here, looking at art innovation on Monument and its creation to bring community trust in our landscapes as we look at local and traject out into global spaces, how we need more of this opportunity to reimagine, to be hopeful, to be more expansive. And I think at this moment I would just like to take a moment of silence for those who we are losing every day in some of the spaces around the globe that may be affecting everybody in this room. So if I can ask you to just take a moment of silence for a minute. Enter the light. And I want to thank my cohort group here at MIT for their wonderful colleague. The way that they have embraced me, I feel really warmed by that. And not to even mention hacking the archives, because as a way of looking at community response to the bios of 3 different men in the community, Chuck Turner, Mel King, and Tanny Lee. Love letters were written from community, and so the inception of that idea really comes to this project from that experience. So thank you very much.